Okay, you want to go on to the budget?
Sure.
What page is it on?
47.
47, the preliminary budget starts.
This is the first time we did an activity like this in the board, especially the board president, because for the new board members, school decisions on staffing have to be made by the middle of March, and then we start our budget process, and that's kind of a little out of sorts for private practice, or so what we wanted to do is at least give you a rough budget, so to show you, just in case there was any glaring needs or glaring deficits, if that needed to impact any staffing issues, or if we had to reduce staff, at least you'd have a kind of a hand on what we're looking at. And I think Scott did a good job writing some of this stuff up, so I'll let Scott proceed with that.
Okay. First thing I'd like to highlight, this budget uses many of the assumptions that we used with the Forecast 5 projections. Used the January 30th actuals that try to put some perspective as to where some accounts are. Please understand this is only 7 months into it and things can change. Overall, the preliminary budget is approximately $20,000 higher, so the deficit would be $20,000 higher than what the Forecast 5 projections projected budget was.
Why don't you go to the next page that shows the numbers on the bottom area, and I think it's easier for people to understand.
Yeah, that's on page.
One more, right, keep going a little bit. What
Down,
page is it on?
just down a little
Is
bit.
that 50?
Go a little bit more,
There you go.
right there. So that's a
It's
summary
on the
that
assumptions
compares
page.
what we saw, right, Scott, from the Forecast 5, where we were going to have a $103,000 deficit, and your new preliminary budget shows $123,000 deficit. So
Yep.
it's roughly $20,000 larger deficit, which I don't even know if it's an increased expenditures, a reduction in revenues. Do you even know?
It's a variation of.
It's not very much, though,
Not,
in either
yeah,
case.
it's a variation of it. Real estate taxes, I tried to get much more accurate with estimating 2017's extension and then putting in 2018's actual levy to try to get a much closer snapshot with property taxes. Also changed on that was the collection rate. We were at 98.5. We moved it to 99. And then also I'm trying to become more accurate with the prior year and current year, shifting it from 53% on the current year collection and 47% on the prior year, to try to make it so it doesn't appear as there's a big over budget line item like it's showing in this current year's. We also adjusted tax refunds, worked with the attorney on getting projections, and looks like we're able to cut that down by $25,000. Technology fee increase. This will be the last year of the one-to-one implementation, so there will be a slight increase on that. That was part of the Forecast 5 projections. The tax refund decrease was not part of that, so that was a little change there. Also, I want to highlight the change in the general state aid new funding formula. So if you went through the actual line items in the budget, you'll see general state aid increase quite significantly, but then the state reimbursables actually decrease down to zero because it's all part of the new funding formula. Capital projects revenue will decrease. That's if there's preliminary work with the zoo. With the working cash transfer, that's instead of being 4 1/4, it would be 200 just for preliminary work. Moving on to significant expenditures, plugged in all of the new salary increases per the collective bargaining. That came out to be approximately 3.56%.
So do me a favor and only talk about what changed since the Forecast 5, because there's only 20,000. You had done that before, hadn't you?
Right.
So are there other items that you want to highlight that are changes from the Forecast 5?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The big one is the Township Treasurer. That's $23,000.
Okay.
LADSI Purchase Service. After speaking with them and looking at our purchase service contract that we submitted to it, that's going to be a $10,000 increase. Capital Operations Capital Fund that we have. we have some old equipment in the kitchen and throughout this building. It's getting to be 10 to 12 years old, so I'm not sure how long some of this stuff can hang on. I do know of a couple of items that are kind of hanging on, and it's getting to the point where I don't think a repair is necessarily the right thing to do, so we put in there an additional 5,000 increase. Field trips, currently I added 3,000 to it. Our contract with First Student for field trips is going up on that, and we seem to be always running kind of out of that budget item end of February into March. So adding a few thousand there for those trips, and that, so they're not significant changes, but any little bit adds up, and then you'll see the difference between the forecast 5 projection compared to what my preliminary projection is.
So Scott, this is a good job in the first time doing this, and it gives the board a good idea. I think to help us going forward in the future, in June and July, when we do the tentative budget for the board and the action from the board, budget versus actual is very helpful. I think in February, since we're only halfway through, it might be better just to do budget versus budget for this report. Because then they'll just see, okay, here's the projected increase to their budget, right?
Yep.
And then when you get to the June report, you could have budget versus actual, and just hide this column and open up the next column, right?
Yep. No, that makes sense, because like you said, then you get highlights the changes.
Is there any questions from this side? The other side? So I think the way I would summarize it, if you don't mind, Kristen reported earlier that based on her projections, class size and everything, that she feels the current estimate for the number of teachers is accurate pending a large increase in transfer students. And what Mr. Grissom wanted to know, was struggle that some of us have every year, is tell us before we have to decide on our biggest expenditure, which is our staff, where we think the projections are, because if we find out later on we have a much larger deficit, we can't really do anything about it. So the way we already knew that we were projecting $105,000 deficit when you provided the other numbers, and now you look closer based on your new information further in the year, based on what we know right now, your projection only about another $20,000 deficit, which are you suggesting, I assume, whether you or Dr. Skinkis want to say that we still feel that it's pretty close to what we had before, and it's not a reason to be concerned about our staffing count for going into next year, based on what we know right now?
Based on what we know now, I don't think we have any issues with staffing.
Okay.
Right now, in the current, we were projecting originally 104.3 for this year. We cut 0.3, and we had to lower the deficit in September, and we had roughly a 0.5 or 0.6 that went unused. So we're using that. We added in for adding some additional social work services. I added an additional 0.1, so it's 104.4. In emergency purposes, come August, if we need to break the glass and add a 0.2, that's something, but that's not something that's going to force us to swing our deficit or double our deficit,
Right.
So I think we're in a good spot. Kristen and her team have done a really good job going through this.
Okay. Thank you, Scott.
I
appreciate
got a question.
Oh, go on, John.
Yeah, thank you. The state aid, is that new funding formula, is that reflected in our 18 budget now, or is it just going to be in the 19 budget?
It's not reflected in our current one.
We have no idea if we're getting any new money this year.
So the 19 budget, it looks like we're going to get an extra $450,000 from that formula?
No, what happened is he mentioned this earlier. It looks like we're getting $415,000, but we got 2 other accounts that used to come from the state are now zero. They just put it all in one lump sum. So really, we're hoping to get about $50,000.
I guess we should add, you are looking at what the impact would be to us if the pension is shifted on to the school district too, right?
Yes.
But it's preliminary, and it's going to take some effort to figure that out, right?
It's preliminary. We still have to wait and see if it comes to fruition.
Right.
If it passes, but I do have those projections.
So
It's
is
based
that
on,
something you're going
I'm
to...
sorry, it's based on what the governor's proposing?
Yes.
you're gonna give us that.
Yes, I have a
We
projection.
worked out a rough sheet. We're going to check that tomorrow. I know
Maybe
the
tonight.
newspapers asked for that as well. But if the governor's plan came to fruition with no changes, which you all know that's highly unlikely, we would basically, by the end of that fourth year, would wipe out the GSA.
So whatever money they give would be offset by what
Would
we
basically,
incur,
whatever money-
just a shift.
Like, just for simple math, if they gave us 1.4, we would, by that fourth year, where I think that would be 100% of fully funding pensions, we
Yep.
would be paying out 1.4.
But I still think it's something we need to address here so that our constituents, our taxpayers know. And that, they can call their representatives and tell them that we're not thrilled about them balancing the state budget by shifting it onto our local property taxes or making us cut our budgets, fire teachers so that the state can say they balanced the budget, right?
That's exactly what
So
we have to
let's,
have.
can you
We
do
can
some
handle
sort
that
of more
March.
detailed report, maybe at one of our upcoming meetings?
Yep, can
So
have
you're
that in
saying
March.
roughly 1.4 million?
If it went, remember, it was, I think he proposed 25%. No, I don't know the exact numbers. Scott's
Yeah,
going to run them.
it's-
Bob's writing stuff down, and I don't know the exact
So
numbers.
it's
So I don't
four-year
want people
process,
to misreport something,
25%.
Bob.
Was it a 25, 50, 75,
Yeah.
100?
Right, so by year 4 of his proposal, the school districts would pay 100% of pensions.
So it'd be phased in 25%.
And I think it was roughly, it would roughly eat up all of our state aid.
Well, it's
So,
nice to have an idea
You're right.
of the worst-case snenario and
Right.
what that would
Or an
entail.
idea what's being proposed right
Yeah.
now.
Yes, of what the proposal would be.
Yeah. So can you?
we'll have that, we can have that in March.
Present
I think you got some stuff going on with your school, Business Officials Association.
Thank you. Anything else for Scott? Now we're going to move on to visitor comments. Since we have one visitor, I'm going to ask her personally, would you like to make comments? All right, then I will not read the long dialogue there, okay?